Starting.
All right, tonight we're going to talk about documentation. RJ even showed up, so stay tuned.
RJ showed up for documentation.
That's right.
Did you document that?
I don't even show for that.
That's like a new thing, right? Do you document? Actually, I should say RJ really does document. I have to deal with a lot of his endpoints.
Marcus knows, man,
for stuff, and he does write.
He lays the groundwork. He does lay the groundwork.
No.
Yeah, I always start out with the best of intentions, and I get
Everyone does.
a little bit in, and then it's gone. Then it's like the workflow comes in, it's moving too fast, and the documentation goes out the window.
So before we jump into this, I do want to mention that in our next episode, we are going to be broadcasting live from Dreamforce.
I was wondering where you're going. I forgot about that.
RJ's going to be here in Atlanta broadcasting. Me and Ryan will be boots on ground in California with you doing Dreamforce. So make sure you run into us. We're going to be doing it 4:30 San Francisco time. So if you bump into us, that's when we're doing it. We'd love to interview and have you on the show. Some of you are our favorites, and you know who you are. So make sure to show up and participate. Tonight, we do have Marcus. I'm going to point as much as I can at the camera this evening. But in the meantime, we have Marcus Flores from Map Anything. He does the documentation here at Map Anything and is going to be kind of talking to us about some of the headaches and things that he does to make his job better. So we can all learn how to document better. That's for sure. I know I have a problem documenting. I mean, but every good developer does.
It happens to everybody.
That's right. What do you call a developer who doesn't document his code?
A developer?
A developer.
A developer. Right.
Yeah, it's coming. I saw that coming. Side note here: if BJ makes a dad joke at you at Dreamforce, I fully support punching him on camera. Though, just make sure you get it. We'll put it on the website.
I don't know if I can condone violence.
Condoning violence. Did you say website? Speaking of websites, we've got a new website coming out very soon. So make sure that you stay tuned. We're going to have a forum so you can answer or ask questions, and we can actually go in and answer them as well as the other community members who visit the site. So please be paying attention to that. And it's going to be really cool. System.debug.com. It's completely changing. So super awesome.
Yeah, and it's system.dot spelled out. System.debug.com.
.com. The second dot not spelled out.
That's right. Only one dot.
And also, if BJ just doesn't make dad jokes, nobody will hit him. So, I mean, I think that's fair.
Hey, man, I personally like the dad jokes. You're going to like them, too. Let me just tell you
I do. I go for the dad jokes, too, especially at lunch, man.
Yeah.
Like good BJ dad joke.
I mean, it's
like each other. Three of these things.
It's 3-on-1 right now, but
same. You ever watch Sesame Street?
Yes, I have.
One of these things just doesn't belong here.
I mean, I'm fine. I can leave. See ya.
All right, so documentation and documenting your code. It's definitely something that gets talked about in most software companies and most development offices.
And not done.
So what would you say, Ryan, why do you feel like documentation doesn't happen as often as it should or as well as it should?
I think it's just because your stereotypical developer, such as myself, it's boring, right? I mean, we're in there, we want to solve problems, we have deadlines we have to hit, and if documentation's not called out as one of those things that actually has a deadline or whatever, that you just lose focus on it is really my history with it. I'm getting better documenting in my code. I've always done okay, but it's that overall arching document. Here's X, Y, and Z. Here's how we arrived here. All of that stuff. That always seems to just be the last thing on everybody's mind. Like I said, just before we started, I always start out with the best of intentions, and it just usually goes away. So actually, I'm hoping to get something out of this because I know there are tools, and I hope we talk about some of them, like all the docs or read the docs and Sphinx and document generation. But I don't know. Yeah, I know there's options. I just don't know many of them.
And there's a ton of options.
Oh, agreed.
Stupid number of options.
But I actually feel like I kind of fall into the same vein of thought. If there was a task on my board that actually said at the end of everything, documentation, I might do it.
10 story points. Yep.
Yeah, 10 story points. There you go. A whole week's worth of work.
Yeah,
Exactly.
nobody's gonna throw that up there though.
Yeah,
So-
nobody would go for that.
So seeing as how
Not at
we
all.
as developers have agreed we're not going to document our code,
I have not agreed. Again, this is maybe a 3v1 kind of situation here, but I have not agreed that I will not document my code.
what could make it easier for somebody like you, Marcus? So actually, first, why don't we start by kind of explaining some of your background, where you came from, how you ended up where you are, what got you into doing the role of documentation?
Oh man, it's a very, very long story that I'll summarize pretty
Thank
shortly. So when I was in school, first time around, studied English, minored in mathematics, got out, found a job working for Volvo as a technical writer. While I was doing that, I took an interest in software because I was working on some vehicle diagnostic trouble codes and things like that that was really close to the hardware. So I did some computer science work at North Carolina State University here, and that was where I really started to get pretty, I have to say, competent at developing and writing code as well as writing documentation about code, because it was a requirement for our projects and things. You had to have documentation, and it would, if not, you'd have points deducted, and pretty severely in a lot of cases. So to make a long story short, I ended up leaving Volvo, joining Map Anything, and here I am kind of in the doc world with you guys now. I'm writing for a pretty specific, Salesforce, so it's a pretty specific place. And it's a little bit different than what I was more accustomed to back in school, where we were learning Java and C and C++, and there are all kinds of neat tools and things like that. But in the world of Apex and, JavaScript, for example, there aren't quite as many tools out there. So we do like REST documentation and that, but that's kind of what I do in a nutshell.
Tools available. What?
Yeah.
I mean, like, as far as I knew, I mean, like, I'll admit Confluence being somewhat new to me anyway,
Sure.
with like Atlassian and stuff like that. Besides Word, like, what tools do you use? What do they do?
Have I used? Well, let's see. So if we take it, I think Java has pretty much the most standard kit available, which is this. If you're using traditional Java development, say in like an IDE like Eclipse or IntelliJ or something of the sort, you can actually comment your code with certain tags, like, for example, @param would designate a parameter, for example, an @return tag would designate the return, and you could just put some, this returns -1 if the function fails, or, whatever the case might be. And then there's a built-in tool within Eclipse that will actually generate an HTML document of your functions and your method signatures, your parameters, and all that based on the comments that you supplied in the code. So that's one example. And there are others that basically have the same idea. Swagger tries to do the same, more or less the same thing for Node and JavaScript. And there are, Doxygen is another one, Oxygen as well for C. And those are kind of available straight off a Linux command line if you're familiar with working there. So there are lots of these little tools available, but in Apex, not quite as many that I've been aware of. So when I think of tools in terms of documentation, I think of things that that kind of automate the process itself.
And what would you say? So you're saying like Apex is kind of lacking the
and
tools.
Possibly.
Well, you can Java doc the heck out of Apex all day long. I mean, you can write it like that, and there may be tools that are out there to do it, but frankly, I've not put the time into studying them. But I would think that you could maybe, I don't know, you'd have to graft Apex out and put it in Eclipse somehow, and you can maybe generate the same type of thing. But yeah, just something that makes my job a little more difficult, just from a development standpoint. Like if I'm looking through your code, just Apex, as far as I'm aware. No, just not yours, just anybody's in general. But like Apex doesn't allow you to set like breakpoints, so I can't like step through the execution like I can in Java. So that kind of makes it difficult, because in Java I can set a breakpoint at main, the main method, and just kind of follow it through. Whereas in Apex I've got to like system.debug every single place where I think I could have a.
Got a what? I'm sorry, say that again.
I got a system.debug
That's right, you do.
flag everywhere. So yeah, so kind of bring it back, being kind of meta. But
so now, where do you typically start? Like, what's your tool of choice? Is it because of in-house tools that you use that specific tool, or is it just your tool of choice? Where do you kind of get off the ground when it first comes to documenting something?
Well, to a large extent, it depends on what I'm documenting, because you have to think at Map Anything, there are 3 different types of documents we could be doing. We're talking like end user is one, probably the most basic. Salesforce configurations, kind of a little more technical, but not too bad. And then we've got the developer stuff. So depending on, which specific audience you're writing to, I mean, you wouldn't write, for example, end user documentation in Confluence or in, with JavaDoc or, anything like that. But so yeah, it really just depends on what your audience is and where it's pointed to.
Okay.
But I get you specifically. You asked kind of like how I start, and really the groundwork for where it all kind of starts for me, at least, is Jira stories. So new feature development. So whatever's in Jira, I kind of just do a sort by and figure out what all the new stories are. And generally, I have a pretty good sense just of being in the stand-ups and listening in and working, just being on the product team. You can pick that up pretty quickly, but that's really kind of where I see the hard, like, okay, here's the raw material for this specific feature.
Now, when for most of the documentation that you're doing for development, right? And I understand that you're doing documentation for both external viewers as well as internal viewers as far as Map Anything goes. However, from an internal standpoint, dealing directly with the developers, what are some of the hangups? Like, what are some of the biggest hangups that you have when you're working with documenting developer code?
It changes pretty frequently, and that's just sort of the nature of the beast, right? I mean, there are REST endpoints where, for example, I was trying to hit something today, and I was like, oh, well, the endpoint itself had changed, and I remembered, because RJ and I discussed that, and I was like, oh, man, and then I had to go dig up a separate, like a Google Doc where that information was carried, and I was like, oh, okay, there it is. Which, it's not a big headache. It's just kind of staying on top of the changes that kind of come about in such an agile kind of place.
So what are some of the key points that you look for when you're documenting the code?
I think minimum and maximums are really big. So for example, if you're looking at, is this code going to return -1 if it fails? And C, for example, it's really common. Like if you search a list and don't find it, you might return -1, for example. So
out of bounds.
Yeah, so I would say like minimum maximums, okay, this function will only accept a maximum of 50 function call, or a 50, I don't know, a list of size 50, or whatever the case might be. I don't know, certain try catches too, I think, are pretty important to document. And for example, why you're running a specific try catch a certain way, those are important to me.
So do you actually scan all the code? Sorry, Ryan, go for it.
No, I want to back up like 2 things. I was taking a breath every time, thinking I could sneak it in there.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Did I hear that right? So is Marcus actually writing your developers' documentation?
Is it really?
No. So here's what the most recent stuff I've really taken on that's really gotten me into Apex was we have certain global functions that can be called, and these functions were produced for others, and so the idea with these functions is that the code that's in there is probably not, or excuse me, the documentation that's in the by the methods and things is not 100% consumable by a developer. So I need to like take it, put it in a more polished form, write some sample code myself, and kind of give a couple of examples just so I can work through it and convey it in a better way.
Okay, so you're not going through their Apex class files and literally making the comments in the code.
No. That's okay. No, that would be extremely difficult.
That would just be too awesome.
I was sitting
That
there.
would be way too cool.
You mentioned being able to step through and understand what the code is doing, and I started like putting the math together in my head going, oh my God, is he actually putting the comments in the developer's code? Like, what the hell are you guys doing over there? But no, okay, I got you now.
Brian's like, you guys just lost so much street cred.
I'm good.
Yeah. The stepping through execution was actually kind of a task I learned at NC State when, a professor might give you, you might be given method stubs or code fragments, and you have to build on top of that. And then part of it's kind of figuring out how all that works together. And so you would want to step through that to kind of see, okay, where is this failing, or where is this, branch of execution going? So when I say stepping through, that's just one other, helpful tool that I can use when I'm kind of working through these things.
I gotcha. Okay, I completely misunderstood. Yeah. Sorry, didn't mean to sidetrack you. Go ahead, Brian. What was the question you were going to ask?
I don't know, but I have 50 million of them, so let's keep going. what are things that developers could be doing to make your life a lot easier?
Documenting all their stuff.
Oh, stop that.
You know, at the end of the day, it doesn't really have to be pretty, but there was a specific method that a point in Polygon method that I came across a couple of days ago. Brian, I think you and I actually looked at this, and it wasn't apparent to me, but what was actually in the comments was actually a sample call for it, and I didn't recognize it at first because it was within the method itself, not above it. And I don't care if it's above the method, within it, wherever, but just having that sort of helpful sample call was like everything, because I was like, oh, well, I can, you know, take this and I can kind of modify it a bit. Just a sample call above the code to be like, you know, inputs this, output expected this, and for the most part, I can kind of run with that.
Okay, so if you're writing things that are accepting parameters, at least giving the person giving the documentation or doing the documentation, just like this is what's expected in, this is what expected out, just as an example.
Yeah, and it can be as simple as can be. Like, it does not have to be super fancy. It's 2 backslashes, like, I don't know, takes an integer, returns a double, whatever the case might be, just something that I can run with, you know. And cleverly named or helpfully named methods being very descriptive are also really helpful, because the name can really kind of tell you a lot.
Yeah,
Ryan's a bobblehead
for me. Yeah, that's a big one for me. I'm like, come on, man, let's tell me what this method does in its name, or, you know, just give me a clue here. Don't just be like method 1, method 2, add number, you know, whatever, you know. It's just tell me what it is we're doing. But yeah. Okay.
So now, is there like a big job need for documentation? Like, is this like something
Just
that would you say?
I would just said need.
You know, I could have worded it anyway, but I'm pulling them out of my butt as I go. So,
This is one problem with your documentation.
That's definitely the one problem with my documentation.
I would say yes and no. I mean, it is a smaller career field, I would say, for sure. I mean, there's definitely not a huge need, because it's kind of transformed over the years. Back in the day, when you had something really complex like AutoCAD in like 1996, you really had to have a user manual for that sort of thing. And Photoshop would be another example where you had to have end user documentation. But for the most part, those are really heavy weight enterprise software platforms where people pick it up and learn how to use it and just kind of Google around. They don't really need as much assistance. In kind of the app-driven world we live in today, it's really one where if your device, unfortunately, or your application is not simple enough to use without documentation, it's probably not going to do very well. So over the years, it is true, I think the documentation, or the software documentation, is kind of, I don't know, evaporated to an extent, but there's still a need for it, you know, especially, I would say specifically really in the Salesforce world, where it's not just a matter of, you know, you're talking about really complex stuff like object-oriented paradigms and relational database concepts within kind of a point-and-click interface. You know, you kind of have to be able to explain that, and that's why, you know, case in point, why Trailhead exists. So, yeah, I'd say there's a need specifically within the Salesforce area, but as a general trend, it seems to be a smaller career field.
Okay. I want to give anybody a chance. Anyone else got a question?
I don't have any questions, really.
Just more comments. Like, I know that there are tools out there. In my Python experience, one of the tools that we used a lot was Sphinx. So you could actually run Sphinx against your Python code, and it would actually it would read your comments and create really nice documentation. Now, just before the call, I Googled something called All the Docs. I think it was
All the Docs.
And it's like an NPM package that apparently you can put your comments in Markdown. I would have to learn more about that. But have you come across people doing it that way? Because there is, in my opinion, unless there's something I don't know, which is entirely possible, there is a very big shortage of documentation type tools in the Salesforce world. And boy, it would be really awesome if, you know, now that we have Salesforce DX, if I could just add a DX command that'd be like, okay, build docs, boom, and it calls my script, and, you know, like a Git hook even would be great.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something to look into, you know?
Megan loves documenting, by the way. I just saw that on Twitter.
Yeah,
Megan.
I just retweeted her. She said that she makes it a task on her Jira board with every project. She makes a task for technical documentation.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Some people are lucky like that.
She puts her own tasks on Jira?
I don't
Some of
know.
us
She
do.
just says her exact words. For me, I make a task for technical documentation on the Jira board with every project.
I feel like no one's going to hire me after this video.
Not all of us have PMs.
Well,
Or
good thing
Mark.
you're employed now. So.
Yeah, your career's over, Brian. We don't want that guy. He doesn't document anything. What the heck?
Doesn't matter how he codes.
Yeah. So no, I was just, and then so I guess I do kind of have a question. So I've had
Yeah.
this argument with many a developer, and I think we all know what the real answer is, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Do you ever get challenged by, we should be writing code that documents itself, blah, 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 right? Rather than, putting comments in my code and everything like that. I mean, have you ever gotten into those discussions with people, and how did you handle that?
Me personally, no, not really. I guess because I can see both sides of the coin. I mean, in a perfect world, I would think you could write wonderfully self-documenting code, but especially when you're looking at really, really low-level stuff, though, like C. I mean, if you were to go on, just go on GitHub and look at V8's, Chrome project or whatever, and just go dig in that. I mean, there's some of the stuff in it that's so esoteric and obscure that there's no way that code's going to write itself. I mean, so you'll have to comment that to a large extent, but then there's other times where it is kind of easily doable. And I guess it's difficult to make a hard and fast kind of rule that satisfies all use cases.
Gotcha. I was just curious. I know I've had that conversation before, and I'm always, that's all well and good. And I'm a big documenter of why, not necessarily what, because to an extent, the code, yep, we know what it does. When a developer reads it, I try to write my code so that anybody can digest it for the most part. So we know what it does, but why the heck did I do it
that way? That's a good point to make too, I think, because it would be interesting to put in there something. Well, this runs in linear time as opposed to, I don't know, exponential time. So that's why I wrote this method this way. That's probably pretty helpful too, especially if somebody's going to be working on your code after the fact. I mean, or because you're not always going to be the one working on it.
Right. So what about that developer who says they don't document their code because of job security?
Who says that?
I think we have a word for that. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say it on the air.
Yeah. Who says that?
I don't know. Not me.
Because I'd be like, careful.
Yeah, like that's
no, it's a jerk move. I completely agree, but you can't denounce that. I mean, you can't deny that there are developers out there who feel like by not documenting their code, they're the only ones who can touch it.
I'm sure there are, but I mean, those are the same people who use single character variables throughout their whole entire thing. And
I'll give you that.
Like
an auto minify.
They're gonna do it.
Ifs.
Yeah.
That's a low blow. That's a low blow, bro.
Well, I'm just saying, like, if they're gonna do it, whether they document it or not, it's not gonna make much of a difference if it's not readable code to begin with, So you could be like, yeah, function A does this. It's like, okay, cool. And then you're searching around for function A, and there's 40 bazillion A's all over the place. So you're like, where the heck did the function call go? Does it even run? Does anyone use this? Like a million different things. So you'll never know. If they don't want you to know, you'll never know.
See, that's a good question. I was just going to say, Marcus.
Yes.
What do you do about obviously the code's constantly evolving. How often do you have to come across it and kind of go, well, this is all garbage?
Well, it's not garbage, but I mean, just in certain products, they just change, man. I mean, there's really nothing you can do about it. I mean, the code's going to change to meet the dictates and the mandates of the business. I mean, I can get frustrated about it, or I can just kind of roll with it. I mean, what I do is I'll hit the endpoint, or if it's changed, or if it's a particular method, I'll work through it, say, oh, well, it didn't change too much, or, and just do an example and kind of keep going. But I guess the trick and what I would like in an ideal world would be, maybe I wouldn't say that something has to be, what am I going with here? Like, you don't necessarily have to make a story in Jira for documentation, I don't think, but maybe just a simple flag that said, I don't know, requires documentation, create a new method for this. And then that would give me a lot more insight into, okay, this is changing on this and on such and such sprint for whatever reason. That would be kind of cool, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, to be able to call that out, like, I've made a change to this method that's gonna, change the way it functions, so we need to revisit documentation. Yeah. I could talk about stuff like that for a long time, just because if I had the free time do things like that. I would make sure that we were able to, when you check in your code, have a Git hook run that goes and checks and say, hey, you know, somebody tagged this revision with code review, line 267, right? And it would talk to Salesforce and create a code review case for somebody to review and stuff. I mean, I've got these lofty ideas in no time. Right?
Jira can do, I mean, the Atlassian suite, I guess you could say, can do a lot of that for you. So if you're using like their Bitbucket plus all that stuff, yeah, you can have it hook into their other services. I'm pretty sure, yeah, and you can have a lot of crazy stuff in there. But yeah,
because I could see where that would be useful. And speaking of job security, that's Marcus's job security right there, right? The code evolves, somebody needs to go and make sure everything's updated.
That's right.
Changed and everything. So yeah, I give you credit because that's got to be a moving target. Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, we've got a tornado watch in Charlotte, so pardon my internet.
Hey, that's nice. No worries. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like a job that you have to stay on top of quite a bit. I mean, it could change often and fast. So
yeah, definitely.
Well, I do want to take the time to say thank you so much to Marcus for being able to join us today. Do we have any questions or comments in the chat?
No, it was just Megan and I discussing a little bit more about the fact that she puts her stories in Jira and stuff, but they're a small company, small team, everything like that. So,
well, speaking of Megan, I expect to see Megan at Dreamforce to be on the show.
Absolutely, we got to
make sure she's there.
Her.
That's right. She better find us because we're going to be doing a live stream. So remember, 4:30 San Francisco time by me or Ryan. I might be down at the booth and map anything in the expo hall.
Probably.
Ryan could be out and about anywhere. Find one of us. We're going to be doing a live stream. We're going to try to interview as many people and share as much of the Dreamforce experience over 30 minutes as we possibly can. And
yeah, that's a lot in 30 minutes.
And then be done. So
yeah. Also, don't punch BJ. He's fragile.
I won't do that.
No, not you. I mean anybody.
I wasn't worried about you, Ryan. Should I have been worried about you? Was
he's
that like on the list?
He's like, one more dad joke, man.
I don't know. Just
thank goodness RJ gave me the right to one more dad joke.
Oh, RJ, how many dads does it take to open a bottle of beer? None. It should be open when his kid brings it to him.
Oh my goodness. Oh my God.
Punishable offense.
That might be a punishable offense.
Hey, you said you liked him. You said you liked him.
I do. That was actually pretty good.
That's on you.
I'm just curious how we're gonna pull off this massive. RJ might be at the booth, and I might be.
RJ will not be at the booth.
No, I won't be anywhere.
RJ will be here in Atlanta.
Brian's gonna be at the booth. RJ's gonna be at home.
We're gonna do it with technology.
All right. Yeah.
It's technology. You can't see it because it's invisible phone, but it's so high tech.
Yeah, that's the iPhone 11 there.
Is that the new iPhone that just came?
The resolution's insane. It's all AR. Like the whole phone is AR.
It's just invisible.
That's right.
It's totally invisible.
They call it real life.
So is it a touch screen or is it like a touch 3 screen?
Oh yeah, no, it's 4D.
It's a thought screen. It's a thought screen, man. You just think it.
Oh.
All right, this has gone off the rails.
All right, everybody.
I think maybe you need to bump us out of here before it gets.
I think you need to bump us out of here.
Bump it.
You all have a great night. We will catch you in 2 weeks, and have a fun Dreamforce. Thanks again, Marcus.
All right. Yeah, thanks, guys. Take care. Yeah.